Good morning, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York City as we follow breaking news. Sources confirm to CBS News the U.S. is carrying out an operation to seize an oil tanker involved in Venezuela's oil trade. The U.S. has been following this specific tanker since last month. We've got team coverage for you right now on this. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is standing by at the White House. But let's begin with CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio, who is tracking the latest for us from our London bureau. Ramy, this information just emerging over the past few moments. What do we know?
Absolutely, yes. The U.S. is now, as we understand it, and according to U.S. officials, carrying out this operation to seize that tanker in the Atlantic linked to Venezuelan oil. It is called the Marinera, and I say Marinera right now because it was formerly called the Bella One, but it has just changed its flag to a Russian flag after the U.S. tried to seize it off the coast of Venezuela. That was about 2 weeks ago, Errol. But at that time, it was able to slip through a U.S. maritime blockade. Ever since then, it's been making this beeline across the Atlantic from Venezuela to get home to Russia. And in the past few days, we've seen the U.S. military actually move equipment here to the United Kingdom ahead of some kind of possible operation, and that includes spy planes circling the area. We understand that the ship does not have any oil on board, though. It did enter Iceland's exclusive economic zone earlier on Wednesday, and about 2 hours ago, we then saw it abruptly change course and move south towards the United Kingdom. Right now, it is still in Icelandic waters, but then in just the past several minutes or so, we did see Russian media publish a photo purporting to be that ship. In addition, a U.S. military helicopter next to the ship, flying next to the ship, suggesting that some kind of operation was and continues to be underway. I will say that CBS News has not verified that photograph, but that is as it stands. You can see on your map right now there as well. What we're seeing is the location of the Bella One, formerly known as the Bella One, the Marinera now, after it changed its flag from Guyana, which was a false flag, by the way, as part of the overall shadow fleet of Russia, and is now has shown its colors that it is a Russian flagged ship and has been trying to get to Russia. That is the latest on what we know right now in this very, very quickly developing story.
Yeah, and then there's a key development considering this shadow fleet that you referenced, Ramy. These are oil tankers taking oil to and from places that are sanctioned by the U.S. Government. And so this is a really interesting development that we're looking at. Let's jump over to Natalie Brand at the White House. The tanker may be closer to where Ramy is, but Natalie, the decision on this is coming from where you are. What is the White House's broader purpose in carrying out this operation?
Well, keep in mind, Errol, that this operation started well before the capture of Maduro this past weekend. It was last month when the president announced this total blockade on sanctioned oil tankers coming or going from the coast of Venezuela. So that's when we saw these operations begin. The seizure of that initial oil tanker, sanctioned oil tanker, the Skipper, which was performed with U.S. military support and an elite team from the U.S. Coast Guard, which has jurisdiction to, make the actual interdiction of the sanctioned oil tanker. And so we've been closely tracking this particular vessel that we've been talking about, the Marinera, formerly known as the Bella, because we knew that, the Coast Guard had been following this vessel. We confirmed with sources earlier this week, CBS News confirmed that there were seizure plans in place, that this operation to target this particular ship would continue. And we also, CBS News confirmed via sources on Tuesday that Russia had sent a submarine and other Russian naval vessels to escort this tanker, which, again, sails under a Russian flag as part of this shadow fleet illegally transporting oil from sanctioned nations like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. So, there definitely was this kind of escalation with Russia sending assets. The question now, as this operation seems to be continuing to seize this vessel, where does this leave the relations between the U.S. and Russia moving forward as, talks have continued over obviously the war on Ukraine and other issues. And this, again, part of the pressure campaign and focus on sanctioned Venezuelan oil. Errol.
Thank you for that, Natalie. Ramy, I want to jump back to you to kind of zoom out somewhat. So we have this breaking development that the U.S. is carrying out an operation to seize this oil ship linked to Venezuela. The bigger picture, though, is this more muscular posture from the U.S. This is in the, Iceland's economic zone at the moment, not too far from Greenland. As Natalie just laid out, the vessel is being aided by Russian submarines and other naval vessels. How does this moment fit into the larger, more muscular military posture of the U.S.?
Sure. Well, this is a continuation, a rise, a surge, if you will, of this force projection by Washington into the Western Hemisphere, as we've most recently seen in Venezuela over the weekend, but also what we're seeing in terms of what President Trump has said in terms of the American backyard, from Latin America, from South America. Now we're seeing across the Atlantic, onwards into European, here, Icelandic waters. This is apparently the new paradigm, the new force, I guess, structure that the White House is trying to convey for American national interests, but also for interests throughout the Western Hemisphere. We've seen what happened with Venezuela. China had its first footprint in South America, in Venezuela, and now it has been effectively at least paused, if not kicked out. Russia has also had its own interests in Venezuela. That is now also on pause. And as this has transpired over the past few days from Maduro's ouster, now we continue to see the White House and the military pushing outwards to try to make sure that, again, national interests are followed here. We're seeing that from South America, but all the way now into European waters. So I think based on the analysts that we're speaking with, we should expect to see this even further. President Trump and his administration have said, have tried to make sure that that is not in doubt. And we're seeing that in this current military operation off Icelandic waters and very near our British coastal waters.
Yeah, Ramy, very good point there. I want to jump back over to our Natalie Brand at the White House to pick up on a point Ramy just made, Natalie, because oil and the importance of oil linked to Venezuela is a top agenda item of the administration this week with this planned meeting with oil executives as well. Talk to us more about why this is such a priority for President Trump.
Yeah, we've heard the president and administration officials emphasize that following Maduro's capture and the U.S. military operation in Venezuela. The administration has said now it wants to focus on rebuilding the oil industry in Venezuela and the oil infrastructure, and potentially bring in, new U.S. companies to try to make that happen. In a new social media post just yesterday, the president also said that interim authorities in Venezuela will be turning over between 30 to 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil, signaling some cooperation at this point with those, the interim authorities, which are part of the Maduro regime. They're still there in place. But as we heard from the president this past weekend, the U.S. is now trying to engage with them to temporarily help run Venezuela, he says, in this interim period before new potential elections can take place. But as we've heard in the past several days from the administration, since the capture, oil, that resource, a key focus for the administration. Of course, as we've been discussing, this started last month with the blockade on sanctioned oil tankers. Now, again, new focus on the resources inside the country itself. And of course, as we've been reported, Venezuela is estimated to have the world's largest oil reserves, even, as production has been limited there due to the Maduro regime. Instability on the ground. The administration is hoping that that may now change. CBS News has also confirmed a meeting with oil executives and President Trump this Friday is scheduled. But again, analysts say that, what happens moving forward, whether or not companies go in there to invest, will really depend on the stability of conditions on the ground, something that remains at this point very uncertain since, key elements of the Maduro regime remain in place, even though Maduro himself is now in U.S. custody.
And Natalie, one other quick question to you on this breaking development of the U.S. carrying out an operation to seize a Venezuelan-linked oil tanker. What is some of the criticism that this administration is facing in Washington about focusing so much on oil and, in their views, not enough on the Venezuelan people?
Yeah, well, that has been something that we've heard from a number of Democratic lawmakers and critics of President Trump, that the U.S. military operation in Venezuela this past weekend seems to be focused on oil without a real plan of what's to come, the next steps during this interim period, the end game here. That's something that lawmakers will be asking about later this morning when in all Senate and House briefings are scheduled by top administration officials who will return this morning to Capitol Hill to talk to lawmakers about what happened this past weekend and what is expected to happen moving forward. With respect to the sanctioned oil tankers, what is interesting is when you heard from lawmakers last month regarding the initial seizure of the skipper, they said that if it is a sanctioned oil vessel, then they were more in support of an operation specifically to target a sanctioned oil vessel, since it was sanctioned by the United States and, it is the Coast Guard's jurisdiction to try to interdict that and go after the sanctioned vessel. But, with respect to the larger oil strategy and the administration's future plans for Venezuela, that's an area where lawmakers have many more questions.
Thank you for that, Natalie. And I want to flag to our viewers, the footage we're seeing now is from a previous operation by the U.S. to interdict an oil tanker. Let's jump back to our Ramy and Inocencio in London. Ramy, there may be some people just joining us now, catching this breaking news. As of this moment, we understand the U.S. is carrying out this operation to seize an oil tanker that's in Iceland's economic zone on its way to Russia from Venezuela. Just update us on what we do know about where it is and why this is.
Yes, what we're looking at is a photo of the Marinera, Errol, and what we understand is that it's about 120 miles off the coast of Iceland. This ship was formerly called the Bella 1 under the flag of Guyana, flying under the flag of Guyana, but we understand that this is part of Russia's shadow fleet, and it has recently changed its flag to a Russian flag, showing its true colors. This after the U.S. tried to seize it off the coast of Venezuela. That was about 2 weeks ago, but it was able to slip through a U.S. blockade at that time. Earlier, we've seen several military aircraft getting tracked over the North Atlantic, heading towards this vessel. And we have seen that photo, if you can put it back on again, of Russian media also appearing to show a helicopter to showing a U.S. vessel close to the ship, flying next to the ship. CBS News has not been able to confirm whether that is, in fact, the case. We also understand the ship does not have any oil on board, but the reason that it has been followed is because it has been transporting, it's believed to have been transporting Iranian oil. And right now, in the past couple hours, in fact, while we've seen it head towards Russia, try to make its way towards Russia from Venezuela, it was passing and still is in Iceland's exclusive economic zone. In the past few hours, it did turn southwards abruptly. It has slowed down on its way, apparently towards the waters here off the coast of Great Britain. But that is where it stands right now. We understand that U.S. operation to seize this tanker is currently underway, and we will continue to follow this breaking story.
And Ramy, earlier you had mentioned and referred to this vessel as part of Russia's shadow fleet, and I had explained that this is effectively a network of oil tankers used by nations sanctioned by the U.S. to skirt their way around those limitations, taking oil to and from places where it is prohibited. How common a seizure like this is this?
Oh, absolutely uncommon in recent memory, Errol. The interesting thing about Russia's shadow fleet is that while it is called a shadow fleet, if you want to know where they are, there are means to do that through satellite imagery, even through transponders. Once you find out if something is part of the shadow fleet, you can still continue to track that. Our CBS News Confirm team continues to do that. And the prevalence of Russia's shadow fleet is not just 1, 2, 3, or 4 ships. Russia's shadow fleet is around the world, through the Western Hemisphere, off Asia's countries of Asia's coasts. So this is following, as you said, the oil, in particular, sanctioned oil from Iran. And we can see where those ships are going, coming out of Iran, going to places like China, which is still importing oil, and other countries around the world that are skirting these sanctions. So to your question, this is rare to happen. We know that the shadow fleet does exist, and with this increased force projection by the United States, we may expect more to happen.
All right, Ramy Inocencio with the latest information for us on this breaking news out of London. Ramy, thank you. I want to jump back to our Natalie Brand at the White House. Natalie, just to check and see if we've heard anything from the administration on this breaking development or when we might expect to.
We haven't as of yet, but obviously it's a developing situation. There's also a White House press briefing scheduled for 11 a.m. this morning. So there's no question we will be asking about it then. As I noted, top administration officials also scheduled to return to Capitol Hill this morning to brief lawmakers as they have many more questions about U.S. operations with respect to Venezuela, what happens in the country next. And as we've been discussing, the big question outstanding is will what remains of the Maduro regime in Venezuela work with the United States and the Trump administration during this interim period. We know the Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, has been sworn in at this point as interim president. And as we were talking about, there does seem to be one hint of at least some cooperation based on the president's announcement on social media that interim authorities in Venezuela will be handing over up to 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil. We'll have to see what happens moving forward. The president over the weekend, when asked about whether he's worried about elements of the Maduro regime remaining in place, said, we know who they are, and he believes that they are acting differently than they would have a few days ago, Errol.
And Natalie, we just got a statement from the U.S. European Command. And I just want to read that to our viewers. Quote, the Justice Department and DHS, in coordination with the Department of War, today announced the seizure of the Bella 1 for violations of U.S. sanctions. The vessel was seized in the North Atlantic pursuant to a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court after being tracked by U.S. CGC Munro. So this is from the U.S. European Command tweeting this message, confirming what we've been reporting now here on CBS News for the better part of the last 20 minutes, that the U.S. has seized and is currently seizing an oil tanker for violating sanctions. Thank you to Natalie Brand and Ramy Inocencio. We will continue our breaking coverage of this story on CBS News 24/7 today, this morning, and throughout the day. So stay close with us. We'll be right back.